I've actually already sprayed this table down once, but I'm just doing it again for the video. A few episodes back, we created some super simple grain spawn jars. I showed you the way that I'd basically just put the dry grain into the jars, top it off with water, and then pressure cook it for 90 minutes. And at that point we have ready to inoculate grain jars. Well, on today's video, we're going to be inoculating those grain jars. Let me show you where they are. I've got them waiting right over there. So these are the actual grain jars that we created in that previous episode. They've been sitting just empty probably for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 days. Christmas has come and gone in between these things, so they've been sitting here for, I'm going to say maybe even a week. The point that I'm trying to make here is that it's perfectly fine to create your grain spawn jars and then just let them sit for a little while anyways. You don't want to let them sit for too long. Let's get the next one here. Now the other thing that I want to point out before we get going is that normally it's right sitting over there in front of the window. But today it's sitting right there. It's in use. We plugged it in at the beginning of this thing. This is our laminar flow hood. I've gone over a few times what these things are, but basically this is what's creating a little sterile environment right in front of this thing. Inside of this box is a big, thick HEPA filter, like a hospital-grade HEPA filter. And this on top is a fan. So it's basically sucking in air. Let me show you the good suck side. Should probably not have that sitting right there. Anyways, that sucks in air, forces it down into that box, and then it forces that air through this filter, and then right in front of here is what's called laminar flow. That's why it's called the laminar flow hood. And basically that just means it's a nice steady stream of sterile air for us to work in. I forgot our liquid cultures that we're going to be using over here. And while I'm fishing them out, I will describe to you what they are. This one right here is a king oyster. I had a monotub of king oyster mushrooms growing right there, and unfortunately it fell to contamination. It actually created this pickle stink in my office for a while. I couldn't figure out what it was, and I finally identified it was a nasty contaminated monotub, which is that one right over there. I'm still dealing with the same contamination. I think I oversaturated, or I know I oversaturated the substrate when I created this. And I've got a little bit of a battle between some chestnut mushrooms and whatever that is going on in there. But I won't get too much off track. The reason I'm telling you that is because one of these grain jars we're going to re-inoculate with another round of our king oyster mushrooms. And then because I'll have one extra, even though I already have plenty of these jars sitting over here, I've got like 5 right over there. I've got 2 button mushroom or portobello mushroom jars waiting, ready to go in the front. I do love button mushrooms, and I plan on having an ongoing supply. So because I have an extra jar, we're going to do an inoculation of some button mushrooms or some portobello mushrooms again. Another thing I want to point out is that I used, for all the rest of my liquid cultures, I used these little pint-sized jars. I know I was going to be doing a lot of button mushrooms, so I wanted to make a big jar of my master liquid culture for the portobello mushrooms. And I don't know if it's to do with the size of the jar, but it seems like I'm getting a lot of like kind of sticky stuff along the side, and I don't know. I think what I'm trying to say is I'm not too sure if I'm in love with using these big like 22-ounce jars for the liquid cultures, but we're going to try it anyways. This liquid culture is actually not quite done. Usually you want to wait until everything's kind of settled out and that fog that you're seeing in there sort of goes away. But I've got the grain jars ready right now. I've got my mind ready to inoculate some baby mushrooms into some grain spawn jars. I've got my hands all sprayed up with isopropyl alcohol. We've even wiped down the table. We've done everything we need to do. There's one other thing that we need to do, but I'll get to that in a second. There's one other thing I wanted to grab and show you, because it's sort of like a tip that I've got going on. It involves this little shot glass and again isopropyl alcohol. Now for this project we're going to be using our liquid cultures, of course. I'll set those right over here. We're going to be using 2 sterile 10 milliliter syringes or 10 cc syringes. I guess that means milliliter. The syringe size doesn't matter. This is just what I've got on hand. We're basically just going to be pulling an amount of our liquid culture out of these jars. And the syringe is what we're going to be using to actually transfer from one jar into our grain jars over here. Now, the reason that I grabbed this shot glass and our liquid isopropyl alcohol here is because I used to flame sterilize my needles, and I'm still kind of testing to see if this is actually good, but I haven't run into any contamination yet. And I've basically just been sort of filling up a shot glass here to disinfect my needles in between transfers and all that sort of stuff, rather than using a flame and getting on there and hoping that I don't melt the plastic and all that stuff. Part of my transcendence of mushroom contamination was, basically just chilling out a little bit and deciding I don't necessarily need to, wipe with isopropyl alcohol and then flame sterilize and then, put the syringes in a pressure cooker for 2 days before I can actually use them to, just simply transfer some baby mushrooms from one jar over into another one. So I've decided to get rid of the flame sterilization. I'll let you know in the future how that works out. But for now, we're using our two 10cc syringes, and we're also using our sterile, I'm using 16 gauge because that's the biggest ones that I can find, but basically just disposable needles. Give me my spray. I'm going to spray my hands down one more time here. Again, even though we're cool with contamination, we're not too worried about it. You still want to make sure, especially on this step, to kind of wipe everything down. We want to make sure that we're not going to transfer any sort of mold, particles or any of that sort of stuff, from one thing to the next. These jars have been sitting out in the open, and who knows what might have fallen on top of the lids. Let me get my isopropyl alcohol wipe. This is another little thing that I kind of makes my life easier, is these isopropyl alcohol wipes. I think we're going to start with our King Oyster. And I haven't actually labeled these yet, so I'm going to have to make sure I don't get them mixed up. I'll set after I inoculate the grain jar, I'll set it behind the liquid culture jar that it is. But this part is pretty easy. We're going to pop our syringe needle open, or our syringe open. Then we're going to get into here. I accidentally ordered large gloves when I ordered them this time, and my hands are definitely not large, so I sort of regret it. Anyways, you just want to leave this needle in this package a little bit. What I like to do is just kind of, pull the cap off with the package, so we can just set that right there. And then what we're going to do, we're going to give this a quick little shake up just to distribute the mycelium that's in there, the baby mushrooms, just to kind of get them all floating around in that liquid. Let's get this needle down into here. We just want to jab this in, and then we're going to tip our jar. We're going to get the needle down into there. Can you see any of that? And all of this mycelium, we're just going to pull as much of it as we can. So I want to tip right towards that thing. Okay. And the reason that we're using a 16 gauge needle is just because it's big enough. It's big enough that it can pull some of these little baby mushrooms into it. Give this a little wipe down that we've pulled that out. And give this a quick dip in our alcohol over here, in between the transfer. We'll get you one up close view of this syringe, just so you can see all that liquid culture, those little baby mushrooms kind of swimming around in there. Normally you want to try and keep the needle in front of your little sterile workspace here, so let's give another dip just to be safe. Wipe it off. And then we go down into our grain jar. And because we have so much liquid culture here, we can basically just use an abundance. When you're growing mushrooms, when you're first starting, if you order a syringe from a mycology lab or something like that, you really don't need to use that much to inoculate a grain jar. You just need to use, like I've used just 1 cc to inoculate an entire jar, and it works just fine. But I wanted to do a test. Now that I've got an abundance of the stuff, I wanted to do a test and basically see if my grain jar is going to grow faster if I spit 10 cc's of the liquid culture into there. In my mind, it makes sense anyways. Now let's real quickly, I probably won't talk too much for this last one just because, you know, I've already done all of the talking I need to do. We're just going to transfer our liquid culture from our button mushroom master over here into our, what's going to be our button mushroom grain jar over here. I do find that the quicker you work, the better, or at least it makes you feel better anyways. Okay, so we're going to go into our jar. Oops, we didn't do our spin. Here. Just like that. You can do a little spin when you're kind of spitting it in there if you want. I find it raises the excitement levels anyways. And now, that's officially it. We're done. Yes. We can finally disconnect the flow hood. We don't need that anymore. Whew, everything sounds a lot more quiet all of a sudden. A lot less sterile though. Now, the only other thing we need to do is I forgot to print out labels for these grain jars. We want to make sure we keep track of, you know, what we're growing, so we know which ones are the button mushrooms and which one are the oyster mushrooms and all of that sort of stuff. So let's head over to the computer. Maybe I'll give you a shot as they're popping out of the label maker or something like that. This is a Munbean, a thermal label printer. I use it for printing all of my labels. It's basically like an inkless printer. I love this thing. It's amazing. I want to get another one so that I don't have to change the paper out like this when I want to print different sizes. But for now, you know, you work with what you got. I love using these little round labels and just sort of sticking them to the bottom. I feel like it's so sleek. And this is one of those things that I came up with. Not that I came up with, but I started doing anyways. That, you know, you just kind of think is one of those clever things. You kind of pat yourself on the back every once in a while and say, you know, dang, that was clever that you came up with that labeling system rather than sticking nasty tape all over the front of your jars and things like that here. But anyways, that will seal the deal. Did we actually get everything accomplished? Yeah, I also shared my little tip about not flame sterilizing. All right, we're good. I'm gonna turn the cameras off. Perfect. As soon as I turned the cameras off, I realized that I probably should have ended this video with a shot of putting the grain jars back on the shelf. But you know, usually I wouldn't succumb to the temptation of turning the camera back on and all that stuff, because I'll end up doing it for hours just trying to perfect it, and I'll never end up using any of that footage in the end. But I think this time I'm going to make an exception and get a nice shot of me putting at least one of these grain jars back on the shelf. I guess it also could be a good time to mention that these will probably take, in my experience, these portobello mushroom jars right here took, I think it was like 2 to 3 weeks to be colonized. Since I shot a lot more liquid culture in there, I don't know, maybe it'll be 2 weeks, maybe it'll be just a week. I guess we'll find out, but usually in my limited amount of experience, it's usually like anywhere from about 3 to 6 weeks until your grain jars should be fully colonized. You should actually start seeing growth, little bits of white and stuff like that in there within, you know, a couple weeks in some cases.